With housekeeping out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the author of The Future in the Past, Reconstructing Article 109.3 of the UN Charter towards the San Francisco Promise to Constitutionalize United Nations and International Law, Dr. Shahryar Shirai. Dr. Shirai is the founder, president, and executive director of the Center for the United Nations Constitutional Research in Brussels and is mastermind behind the Youth Climate Ambassador Program. Dr. Shirai possesses a PhD in international law from the University of Kent. His thesis, Reconstructing Article 109.3 of the UN Charter towards Constitutionalization of the United Nations and International Law, is the basis of the book we're covering here today. For over 30 years, Dr. Shirai is engaged in activism, advocating for nuclear disarmament, UN reform, the International Criminal Court, and democratic global governance. He's participated in numerous civil society forums addressing UN reform and has been an NGO stakeholder at the COP negotiations on climate change since COP25. Dr. Shirai will be known to some of you as a former member of the Governing Council of the World Federalist Movement, Institute for Global Policy. With that said, it's now my pleasure to hand over to Shahryar. Shahryar, please talk us through the conclusion of your magnificent book, and then we will return for questions.
Well, first, greetings, everyone. Happy New Year. Although worldwide, we have a wild happenings, chaos, and I am appreciative to CGS and the attention that now we are getting, and in terms of what can be done, us as citizens, in terms of maybe making a world that makes more sense. Now, this is the last chapter that I'm covering, and it's actually the normative part of the chapter. And it should be thought-provoking. The chapter is on constitutionalization of the UN and international law. Should a charter review happen? Assuming that convening the charter review finally occurs, two substantive questions come up. First, should the P5 veto be feared, which technically would kill any charter changes output by the review and rendering the effort useless? And second, even without the application of the veto, should we expect the first review to produce a critical mass of constitutional changes to trigger the transformation of the UN and therefore international law? In other words, is it reasonable to expect that the review would indeed experience a constitutional moment? Before taking the above questions, the chapter first considers the age-old question of UN reform. That is, can the UN be reformed or go through a series of gradual changes, either procedurally or through charter amendments, in circumventing its known shortcomings and opting for a more effective UN, which would in turn empower it to fill in the global governance gaps that exist? Or, as the Australia and the anti-veto camp feared in San Francisco back in 1945, the charter may become immutable, quote unquote, and frozen, and only a review conference of the San Francisco magnitude would accomplish its transformation. The UN reform notion is as old as the UN. In 1945, the Big Three's dictation of parts of the treaty at San Francisco had already started the future reform wish list. The past and current UN reform topics encompass many areas and have been used in conjunction with the topics such as democratization of the Council, human rights, the environment, the compulsory jurisdiction of the ICJ, and merit-based elections of the officers at the UN, including the Secretary General. Some of the more relative recent questions and collective efforts at the UN for Council reforms are, can we have a more expanded and representative Security Council, as was recommended by the diligent work of the high-level panel on threats, challenges, and change in its 2004 report to the Secretary General. This was during Kofi Annan, and some of the biggest movement towards UN reform was done at that time. Or another effort, the 2005 World Summit recommendations, where in its outcome document, the world's leaders called for the early reform of the Council. Would those efforts that technically still exist and were a group of states collectively sponsored, would those efforts lead to any concrete results? In parallel to the independent experts and collective efforts on RC reform, there are also blocks of states pursuing their interest in targeted reforms. For example, the G4 states, that's Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil, as the major world powers of today, which in many ways their weight surpasses some of the existing permanent members, such as the UK, France, and Russia, in terms of either the size of their population or economy or both, have opted to become additional permanent members and have led to a block of states on a new formula for Council's expansion. Then there are SC reform proposals, which are veto limitation type of reforms, for example, related to the more current and urgent situations on humanitarian interventions and their responsibility to protect R2P. Along those efforts, a block of states led by the small five, S5, this is important, recently, 10 years ago, appealing and sort of opposing the P5 moral obligations and their responsibility not to veto the Council decision related to humanitarian situations or the recent 2022 General Assembly resolution to what I call explain your veto after the fact, all in the direction of reforms without charter change to, in effect, limit the powers of the P5 and frame their use of the veto. As I mentioned, the ideal of Security Council reform is as old as the UN itself. The UN's first birth year at the GA, this was in London, since the New York building wasn't ready yet. Philippines and Cuba jointly, with the backing of some other states, tabled a draft resolution to, quote unquote, delete the veto. Then in the second year of UN, Argentina, with endorsement of some weaker states, proposed the resolution to abolish the veto, even a stronger term, that the veto is so bad that, like slavery, we need to abolish it. Soon, those substantial efforts for charter change were thwarted by the push from P5 that this is not the right time, and let's wait for Article 109, Paragraph 3, and the promise of Charter Review of 1955. With the delay in the promised Charter Review in the 70s, instead the P5 proposed special committee on the Charter of the United Nations and on the strengthening of the role of the organization, a long committee name. It was established in 1975. And at the beginning, it was called open-ended. It had an open-ended as a prefix, or never-ending committee, as I call it. It has been meeting since 1975, once or twice a year, and ever since to the present. In the case of giving the illusion that, we are changing the charter, or we will change the charter. In the case of the United States proposing the committee back in the 70s, starting in the late 1960s, during the last rendezvous that I mentioned on the Arrangements Committee to conduct the review in the previous chapters, by the time of President Nixon's administration, the US State Department under Kissinger had adopted an anti-charter revision policy. I don't know how many of you had heard of it. It was new to me when I researched it. But by 1975, This US administration view was conveyed to the Congress and adopted in the House Concurrent Resolution 206 of the 94th Congress. It was also included in the final recommendation of the Subcommittee on International Organization of the House of Representatives of 26 November 1975. So these all things happened in 1975, 74, 76 time period. Since then, the general policy of the US on UN reform has effectively become to support UN reforms which do not require charter changes. In other words, keep the charter frozen. This is the US policy. It was a Russia policy from the beginning. No wonder then the special committee on the Charter of the United Nations and on the strengthening of the role of the organization, long name, a couple of years after its creation, coincides with the US Kissinger Doctrine and the US policy change. It modified committee's bylaws, and it was added that the committee would consider all kinds of reforms that exclude charter change. Very important addition to the bylaws of the committee. And seemingly in contradiction with the title of the committee. Last time I checked a few years ago on the special committee's working dossier, the main decision of that year was how to compensate the peacekeepers. You know, they consider petty issues. Now, constitutionalization of the Charter, international concepts. Let's move on. And on the positive note, let's assume that the Charter review does happen. What do we want in constitutionalized UN and international law? Well, all the good stuff. We want democracy and world citizens' representation directly in a world parliament. We want accountability and responsibility for our elected officials, like the Secretary General or whoever runs the different organs. In other words, we should elect them based on merits, and we can terminate them if they don't perform or are not accountable. An important element is separation of powers. And we want the executive, the legislative, and judiciary to be independent, first of all, to exist, and secondly, be independent of each other. And there would be some sort of judicial review and due process of law and enforcement to be in the Constitution. We also want fundamental rights to be explicitly mentioned, protected, and enforceable universally. As to human rights, not to be like today, where there are vague definitions and no international court for human rights, which, by the way, should include environmental rights, which doesn't exist in the existing Universal Declaration. And in my opinion, rights to ethical technology. This is recent and because of AI. But also, as of right now, we have no international court on human rights, no enforcement, and the best we can do is what is called naming and shaming. I'm sure that naming and shaming really scares Putin and Trump. And last but not least, we want multi-level constitutionalism, as we already experience in the federal systems. In other words, the overarching global government should not interfere in the domestic politics of the states unless it's of an interstate nature, conflict, or a fundamental question. This multi-level constitutionalism in the European Union is referred to as subsidiarity and complementarity principle. In other words, a constitutional UN should not replace national constitutions, but be complement to them. Okay, legal and political theory aside, let's see how we can convene the 109 review conference and what kind of outcome can it have. I mentioned if any outcome, because paragraph 2 of Article 109 talks about ratification process before the changes take effect and go into force. That's where the dreaded P5 veto plays again and can steal any outcome. but it can only apply in that later stage. It's very important to understand the charter review has two stages. One stage, adopting the resolutions and adopting the changes where the P5 cannot veto, and the second stage that they go back to their governments, to their people, and they want to ratify. So if they veto the ratification, they can only do it in that second stage, which usually takes 2 years. I'll talk about it more later, but first let's see how we can get the 109 review, which is in state of coma, back to life again. Based on my research, charter review, based on paragraph 3 of Article 109, has been partially implemented and has legal force. How can the partially implemented article then be given legal effect to complete its operation? My research points to 3 legal strategies to effectuate paragraph 3. The first two involve legal cases at the ICJ, and the third option is in our good old General Assembly. The ICJ, option 1, contentious cases, one or more states versus the permanent 5. Under this scenario, belligerent states whose rights have been violated by permanent 5, for example, the recent cases of Venezuela or Ukraine or Yemen or Iran or other ongoing wars, we have plenty of them, over 50 in 2025, rather than specifying details of an aggression case, the plaintiff state's objection becomes more generalized in terms of defects in the UN Charter, which gives these permanent 5 member states unequal and extraordinary powers, including the veto, which prevents the UN from providing world peace and security, or nuclear disarmament, conflict migrations, or non-violent means of conflict resolutions, things that UN is in its mandate but cannot perform. Probably the ICJ would throw the case out of the court on the P5 would just not show up, as they are not bound by charter to do that. But still, it would get worldwide attention and from state and form state alliances to demand change. Certainly would get visibility. Second case, which is more probable or more in the competency of ICJ, is ICJ advisory opinion, application by one or more UN organs or agencies. In other words, suing the United Nations for its non-performance. In more proactive years of the ICJ, in the earlier years, in 1949, where ICJ had more respect, there was a court case, very important, called reparation case, which actually involved Zionist terrorists assassinating 2 of UN representatives on a fact-finding mission in Palestine. This was during Israel getting its independence. By the way, one of the murdered representatives was a Swedish count, and the other a French colonel, I think. Here, the ICJ, in addition to asking for damages for the UN, made a milestone ruling that established the UN as a legal international entity, just like we have personal persons or legal entities, corporations or legal entities, international personality status for the UN. This is one of the landmark rulings that has been referred to in many court cases ever since. So UN not only can sue, for example, it was suing Israel, but as a legal personality can be sued itself. But according to ICJ statutes, Article 65 and 68, it is generally interpreted as only UN organs can do that. So in addition to General Assembly, which is a UN organ, there is a list of like 15 organs of the UN, for example, World Health Organization, WHO, or UN Environmental Program, UNEP, the Human Rights Council, and a few others that can ask for advisory opinion of the court on responsible performance of member states and the UN organization itself. In other words, we cannot do it as people. States cannot ask for advisory opinion. Only UN organs can. A classical example is the case of about 3 decades ago, where WHO went to court under the case of nuclear weapons. It was called legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapon case. That not only using the bombs, but storing them, or its threat of its use, or its production is damaging to the world citizens' health. They took it for advisory opinion, WHO, to ICJ. So in our case, for example, on governance of climate change or extreme poverty or pandemics like COVID, or these wonderful agencies of the UN can point to charter defects and make a review and upgrade request. In other words, they said, we cannot do our job like UNEP or WHO because there are fundamental issues with the UN Charter. Court, what do you think? So this is obviously a viable way of pursuing reactivation of the review conference. Then we have the General Assembly decision to reactivate what was called the Arrangements Committee of Article 109, Paragraph 3. Recall that this committee never completed its task, and in the last rendezvous mentioned in previous chapters, it was decided to be kept in being. Therefore, all it takes is to reactivate it again. Supposedly it exists. It's a phantom review, which is waiting to be triggered. There are 2-3 different ways that can be done legally and procedurally in the General Assembly. It's mentioned in the book. However, apologies, I rather not discuss it openly or to be recorded. This part, well, actually, I'm not saying anything that I don't want to be recorded, mainly because of the countermeasures that the Permanent Five may devise to block those moves. In other words, if you are going to reactivate charter review based on Article 1 Paragraph 3, it kind of should be a surprise to the Permanent Five. But the reactivation of the General Review Conference at the General Assembly would be the quickest and the most effective way of the 3 paths. That said, these avenues are not mutually exclusive, and probably the best way is to try all 3 at the same time. Now, convening the review, who is afraid of the veto? Is it invincible? Charter amendment in the review process, their damn veto haunts us again. Paragraph 2 of Article 109, as I mentioned, allows for veto during the ratification stage. Now, in the 60s, this I found out accidentally. In the 60s, we had 3 amendments under Article 108 to the Charter, which procedurally have the same stages and process as a Charter review. In my research, while following the different stages of these 3 amendments, I realized something very, very promising. All those 3 amendments, one related to the expansion of the Security Council from 11 members to 15, and the other 2 regarding expansion of the ECOSOC membership, all 3 were opposed by the majority of the Permanent Five, not just one. In case of the expansion of the Security Council from 11 to 15, relatively a minor change, Russia and France had vetoed openly, and United States and UK had abstained. We can consider their abstentions as also a no vote, since they were hoping that Russia and France's no votes would not need them to face or be shamed in the world. But interestingly, after 2 years, towards the deadline of the ratification, all 5 permanent members had ratified and turned it into the UN Secretary General. In other words, overturning their own no votes. How did this happen? Being excited about this defeat of the veto, I investigated a bit more. What seems to have happened, that decision-making on the UN in those countries had shifted from the executive branches, based on their constitution, to their congressional and legislative branches, which during those 2 years debate the role of the civil society and the people and media had changed the policy of the executive branches. In case of Russia, perhaps because of its world image or not wanting to be left out of the UN, she too deposited her ratification on the last day of the deadline. This exact scenario also happened regarding the other two amendments on the Economic and the Social Council membership expansion. With this historical precedence, an important finding about invincibility of the veto, that it can be defeated, at least in charter revision process, what kind of outcome can we expect from the promised charter review? In other words, assuming that we can defeat the veto, if the no vote at the conference. Therefore, by rejuvenating the San Francisco Promise and further assuming that the existing UN and Council reform efforts, including the substantial institutional changes required at the functional agencies, would it be channelized to the review? Would the review also be receptive to fundamental legal questions and concepts revolutionary to international law, such as direct effect, representation, participation, accountability, in more general terms, UN democratization, or in cognitive terms, would the review lead to the start of UN constitutionalization process? In case of convening the conference, it seems the review process may first go through a frustrating period of trying to focus on solving some issues and not the others, which may not be possible in the complex and interrelated, integrated world that we live in. For example, on the subject of Security Council reform, assuming that a small S5 type proposal or responsibility to protect or some other veto limiting proposal gets sufficient support at the conference and the veto is weeded out or survives with limited applicability, the second major concern with the council reform is expansion of its size in terms of the permanent or non-permanent membership. In that case, what to decide with the existing contested proposal? Would any of them get the 2/3 backing? Should it be high-level panel's recommendation under two models that include a combination of new permanent and non-permanent members to be added, which would expand the council membership to 24 states? Or is it sufficient for the council just to add the presumed four superpowers, Germany, Japan, Brazil, and India, become permanent members, as in group of four proposal? Or should it take the counter proposal of the United for Consensus group? Who are they? They are 25-member states, and they are led by G4 rivals, Italy, South Korea, Mexico, and Pakistan. Or should the council be inclusive of blocks of nations, such as the Arab and the Muslim leagues, or regions, such as the EU or African Union, with some type of formula as to how their member states should be represented? Or should it consider some of the civil society proposal that you and I are making, and some of our own colleagues' proposal for council reforms, the recent ones? Tough. The review conference most likely at first would find itself deadlocked on the question of the council reform. In fact, the past failed attempts at reforming the council cannot be all attributed to the P5's unwillingness and manipulation. The lack of a resolution had also partly due to the fact that stakeholder state could not agree amongst themselves, like the G4 versus the consensus group, the 25 consensus group. How about other global challenges humanity is facing? For example, nuclear disarmament, a vital concern of the Assembly, would continue to be unresolved. Armed conflicts would continue. The election of top UN officials would continue to be based on politics rather than merits. How about climate emergency? The institutional requirement of how to tackle global warming, the different substantive suggestions, such as strengthening environmental institutions or recommendations for creation of an environmental court, or streamlining the environmental agencies, perhaps under one umbrella, upgraded to a main organ status to be called the Environment or Sustainable Development Council, would all be on the table at the review and subject to consideration. However, if the states insist on their absolute sovereign rights and try to continue and confine climate change decisions and impacts to their own borders, reaching agreement similar to the outside of the review, which we have seen in Paris Accords, will be deadlocked. How about human rights? Are we going to continue with no HR protection, no court system, and rely only on naming and shaming, no enforcement? Perhaps after some months, if not years, of unsuccessful attempts to solve substantive global governance questions in fragments and in isolation, the conference might then reach what we hope a critical constitutional moment. In defining the constitutional moment in the UN context for governing, I suggest the following three fundamental apexes as the trigger for radical departure from the past and the transformation of institutional frame of the organization. This moment would be reached when at least the 2/3 of the majority of the states at the conference would come to these three fundamental realizations. The realization that the fragmented global governance regime in managing the increasingly complex and interrelated global challenges has been mostly inadequate and failing. Addressing these challenges requires coherence, holistic, collective, and integrated approaches in governing, a transformation from governance to government, democratically with the necessary representation, transparency, and accountability. That the peoples are object and subjects of international law and its ultimate legitimizers, the people, not the states. Therefore, the formal recognition and protection of a rights-based global citizen is absolutely necessary. That the states in their collective, this is number three, the states in their collective approach to global commons and peace and security are compelled to share limited sovereignty mutually with other states, as well as the global citizens, in other words, co-decision making. In other words, reaching the grand realization that global citizens are the rightful as well as the rights-bearing agents of global and political social transformations, the only legitimate interlocutors of the global interest. And for that reason, the best guarantors of a just and democratic global society. This paradigm shift from states' absolute sovereignty to multi-level governmental system of states and peoples in a federal or supranational model is not a new phenomenon and has had many historical precedences. In fact, most of the world's existing 25 federal states, which I think they count for like 40% of the world's population, in one way or another have experienced this constitutional moment. For example, in the case of the United States, very important, it is generally agreed that America's Constitution moment occurred in 1787, 11 years after the American Revolution and independence. This is when the original 13 sovereign states, in order to solve their interstate problems stemming from having a state Congress, but no People's Congress, no judiciary, and no executive organs, met in Philadelphia to review and to amend the Articles of Confederation. While at the convention, the member state went against the Confederation Treaty's amendment rules, changed their formal charter rules at the conference, and abandoned consensus decision-making. In other words, at that time, every 13 state had a veto right. Consequently, at the convention, the Articles of Confederation were essentially turned upside down from state-centric to that of popular sovereignty, and the focus became with the people. Therefore, the Philadelphia Conference transformed into the Constitutional Convention of the United States of America, outputting a full-fledged constitution which incorporated an unprecedented and significant Bill of Rights a bit later. After the review reaches stalemate at the UN Charter review, where nothing is agreed upon unless everything is agreed upon, perhaps as a package rather than singly, and reaches the earlier mentioned three realizations, especially on the recognition of a rights-based global citizen, that is when the conference reaches its transformational moment towards a democratized and constitutionalized UN. Only then the vision, the achievable goals, and the path becomes crystallized, and the required institutional structure and components to a degree would start to fall into place at the conference. Okay, let's assume that at the review conference, we finally come to the realization that we cannot have governance, but we need government. But this still needs to be approved by the permanent five. Then comes the question of ratification. I think we need to, in this case, take the P5 country by country. In case of France, UK, Russia, they would be conscious of the fact that this is not 80 years ago and World War II winners, that they're not the winners necessarily at this stage in the world, that circumstances have changed, that in fact, judging by population, exclusively on having nuclear weapons, which doesn't hold true anymore, or the size of their economy, they are not superpowers. So they would probably go along with the UN 2.0 that they are a partaker in making it happen. As to China, they are very well aware of the world economic interdependence, and they owe their success to globalization. So they cannot leave the world state and still prosper in isolation. So they would probably, being a stakeholder to the conference, would also ratify. The only P5 that may reject the outcome of transformed United Nations, especially under Trump regime, would probably be the biggest known superpower, and that's the United States. But even then, judging by United States' own constitutional history, it seems a scenario of a US without the UN would be very, very short-lived. During the 1787, this is totally new to me. I don't know to how many people, and I know a lot of you are very well informed, but still I think to many of us it's new, that during the 1787 transition of the Confederation to the Federal Union, the then superpower state of New York, having doubts about the United States of America, did not adopt the convention's output. They did not sign, and was not one of the founding states that ratified the Constitution at the time that USA was legally created. However, shortly thereafter, the state of New York, I think it took less than a year, recognizing the synergy and the moral and material power of the Union, rejoined its ex-Confederation members in a constitutional United States of America. I think this is, to me, it was a wonderful finding, and I don't know what percentage of the population of the United States know that New York did not sign the Constitution at the beginning. Therefore, in the event of the United States not ratifying the review's output and opting to stay out of a new UN, similar to the state of New York experience, the United States, after a short period, would most likely rejoin its fellow United Nations in the global neighborhood. Conclusion, short. In conclusion, governance is what governments do. In fact, a state without a government is considered a failed state, and the condition is called anarchy. In the global setting, without a government, the existing so-called global governance is in fact dysfunctional and anarchic. With the recent death of international law, happened in 2025, and irrelevance of the UN and extreme global challenges we are facing, a world government light in a UN constitution seems to be not only absolutely necessary, but upholding the San Francisco promise also possible. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm open to questions.
Okay, so you can ask your question by raising your hand physically or by doing it electronically or in the chat. Do it the first two ways if possible because it's hard for me to keep constant observation of the chat. Well, I will start since I don't see anybody else. It seems brazenly obvious to me that a call for a constitutional convention is justified because, for one thing, I was shocked to learn that initially, the 51 or 52 initial members, most of them were coerced or browbeaten into joining. And since coercion is grounds for, dissolving the whole treaty, right there, there's reason to have a constitutional convention. Secondly, um, the insofar as and most of the countries now, of course, are new, since the time of the initial Constitutional Convention. Secondly, the P5 has not kept the peace, which was there insofar as countries agreed to the veto. They agreed because the P5 said, in essence, we need the veto in order to do our job of keeping international peace, and we will do that. And they didn't do that to the point that at the time that Gaddafi gave his talk in 2009 to the UN, there were 65 wars, and there have been a whole lot of wars since then. Obviously, the veto has not enabled the P5 to do what it promised. So that violates the original agreement. And beyond that, the P5 actually has abused their role by abusing their power to manipulate things to get their own agendas passed rather than keeping the peace. So the review would be able to set its own rules, and so I don't see a problem with that. But how to prevent a repeat of coercion? Because now, like President Trump has said, I don't need international law. Just upfront, no international law. It used to be that, the countries would give some phony reason for attacking a country. Now we don't even need a phony reason. So the big question in my mind is how can the UN prevent big powers from abusing their power and ignore whatever rules have been agreed to? So we have the constitutional revision, we have new rules in place that are wonderful, but what's to prevent countries from just doing the big powers, those who feel they can do it, to just do whatever they want anyway?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with your analysis and sort of preamble that preceded your question. And I think you would be doing wonderful in the legal team that would go to court suing the United Nations for lack of performance and the permanent flag for not keeping their responsibility and accountability. But basically, the difference between now, if a charter review conference is held, constitutional review versus World War II is tremendous in terms of the difference in circumstances. At that time, you had still, until the first few weeks of the conference, Hitler was in charge. Germany hadn't surrendered. until the end of the conference, still Japan war in the Pacific was going on, and it was more of an excuse for the permanent five or the winners of World War II to keep these extraordinary powers, to demand these special privileges and the veto, because they were like the savior of the world, or that was how it was portrayed. So the European countries, the 50 states which were there, as I analyzed in my chart, most of them were under the influence, and a lot of them were governments in exile, like Netherlands, like most of the European countries that just after the Allied forces had freed them, they were just thrilled to be free, and they would listen to whatever US or the permanent five, in case of countries under the influence of Soviet Union, would say. Those circumstances have tremendously changed. That's one thing. Secondly, those who were proponents, the anti-veto proponents of a charter review, were saying, and reasonably so, that let's learn from our experiences. Let's see if this model works, this Security Council and the veto and peacekeeping works. If it doesn't, we got to change it. So we have had 80 years of no change. So I think the circumstances are way, way different than 1945 June, when the charter was signed.
Other questions? Lee,
Oh, we can't hear you.
you're on mute.
Still on mute.
Lee, can you hear us? You're on mute.
Lee actually isn't on mute, but we couldn't hear it anyway. So there might be a problem with your microphone, Lee.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Are there other questions until
So
she...
maybe you can briefly put your question in the chat, and
Oh, that's a good idea.
yeah, if James can read it for us, that would be great. While we're waiting for the next question, maybe I can ask Joseph Barata, who is an expert in some of these congressional things and the U.S. Constitution, that how much did we know about New York not signing to the U.S. Constitution? And I think there was another state, New York and maybe Illinois, I'm not sure. 2 states didn't. 11 states signed up.
Right. And Sharyar, will you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question is, you as an expert, and what do you think of the general population and what they teach us in political science classes? How well known is it that New York State and one other state, I don't remember the name, did not sign the US Constitution at the convention, at the Philadelphia Convention? They rejected it and they left.
Well, Rhode Island was the last holdout, and I think New York rapidly ratified the new Constitution under Alexander Hamilton's leadership. I think North Carolina was held out for a while, but what is really instructive is that Rhode Island did not ratify the Constitution until 1791, after the government had gone into operation. And there were these other holdouts. I've forgotten exactly just what the timing was, but uh, the Constitution provides that the government shall form when 9 of the 13 original states ratify the Constitution. So this happened when several of them had not ratified it, and this created such an awkward situation that there was pressure upon, especially lastly, Rhode Island, uh, to ratify. Um, it's it's all a little confusing because the Articles of Confederation were enacted in, in 17 just after the Battle of Yorktown, um, and then it did not go into force until just a few years before it got so bad that there was a movement led by George Washington and others to convene another conference to uh, provide for a more perfect union. And they met in Annapolis in 1786, did not have a quorum, so they postponed the meeting till the next year. Philadelphia, they finally had a quorum, and the Constitution was drafted in secret, just in the summer of 1787. There was such opposition to it that Hamilton and Madison and Jay all wrote the great Federalist Papers as an as a bro, a bro as a defense of what was it of the formation of a strong national government in the federal Constitution. And so New York ratified it I think it was the next year, 88.
Yeah. So this is actually, we could maybe draw some parallelism that there are challenges. A lot of people are concerned about the charter review because US is going to walk out. But, this historical perspective shows that there is, even if it does walk out, that a good chance of it coming back again under a new UN.
Okay, and we have Lee's question, and now it's just hidden from my view. Uh, um, yeah, she says, I keep trying to think of any steps our organization can take to promote convening the review. As far as I know, we have no congressperson who's willing to promote steps towards convening a review of the UN Charter. Are we limited to just working through education of the public? That's Lee's question.
I think Citizens for Global Solutions or World Federalist Movement are better apt at responding to that question. But yes, we got to get this UN we need, the new UN, to the people. We shouldn't count on New York City, the seat of the UN. We shouldn't count on the diplomats. We shouldn't count on even executive branches, which have temporary interests to be, on power. And it should go to the legislative branch and the people if we want UN to be changed.
And it seems to me that, it was public pressure apparently that overcame the vetoes in the past round. You said after a couple of years, the
Right.
it came from because of public pressure. So,
Exactly.
so it seems like there should be a campaign, a global campaign to persuade the public to push for this.
Exactly. That's why we have wars, why there is climate change happening, why, if AI is uncontrolled, may sometimes dictate to us and take over. So these are all good reasons for the public to get involved.
David Otten.
On the point of certain states holding out after the um, original convention, there's a book that I'd like to recommend to you, Cherie, and others that explains all of that. And it's this one. I went to my bookshelf to find it. The Great Rehearsal by Carl Van Doren. And he explains in this particular book how the United States was formed, going from a confederation to a federation, and how the title of that book, The Great Rehearsal, then is how that could serve as a model for how the United Nations could go from a confederation to a federation. And just a
Thanks
small
for this
footnote, I
lead.
looked up the page about Rhode Island, and when it finally joined in 1790, it only joined because there was a vote of 34 delegates to 32. So just by 2 Rhode Island delegates did the state of Rhode Island finally join the United States in 1790.
Thanks for the lead.
David, could you put that in the chat so that we can see what the name and author is? Like if it's Carl with a C or a K? Joseph.
Well, yes. Well, Sharyar, I must tell you, I tend to read your work differently than you yourself do. Um, and I'm struck by the power of your belief in international law. I see your book as a primer for all of us about confirming our reforms, our view on reforms in international law. It would have to be done, and the states are, on the whole, rather willing to, at least until Mr. Trump, rather to engage in treaty making and formation of international law. What I understood from your book were your examples. You claim that the Big Five, after the end of the Cold War, by about the time of the Persian Gulf War of 1990-91, they began to limit their own use of the veto, a kind of voluntary renunciation of the veto. Now, we've certainly had vetoes since then, but the Persian Gulf War was fought with the concurrence of the Soviet Union, well, 90, with of Russia and China. Then you need to bear that in mind. The UN began to work as it was designed to, at least roughly, and and so you take this as a kind of turning point in history, whereby the Big Five may continue to exercise what Federalists used to call the powers of world government, including the definition of crimes against the UN, the administration of punishments for violation, even a taxing power, whereby the Iraqi people were made to pay for the costs of the the invasion of Kuwait, and so on. And reading this, I began to see that, in your view, you don't say it this way, but it seems to me the implication of your book is that far from meeting in a constitutional convention whereby the people might uh, uh, impose a popularly representative assembly, the big three sovereign powers in strictly anarchic conditions would still lord it over the whole world, and a kind of imperial solution to the problem of the lack of uh, true government. And if you saw the news in the last few days, you'll know that Mr. Trump claims that he is not subject to any international law. He is methodically pulling the United States out of the climate treaty and so on. He easily just uses force against countries like Iran and now Venezuela. He's threatening Colombia while he's at it. And
Greenland.
what is happening, Mr. Sharyar? What is happening is not what you envisioned. It's your patience with the record of old conference votes is admirable, but I'm afraid my question is, isn't historically what is happening that the world is far from moving toward a popular government of the world, and rather that we're empowering the big five to continue the imperial unification of the world under their command.
Right. Yeah, actually, when it comes to Security Council, I'm doing a historical analysis and review, and up to today, of course. In historical analysis, in the 1990s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and breakup of the Soviet Union, we had a period of about 20 years that the permanent five were sort of in tune. And their veto, I don't think, was used at all during that period. And International Criminal Court was created at that time. World Trade Organization, WTO, was created at that time. But then also courts were created, like in former Yugoslavia, by Security Council. A sanction list, a couple of thousand people and corporations were recognized as criminals by the Security Council. It went out of its scope of activities and tried to run the world as a government. So that was there was good part of it when the permanent five were unified, and the bad part of it, which was they were becoming hegemonic. And that itself is very dangerous. So I don't believe in international law, especially in after the events of the past 2-3 years. And we're kind of saying it's the death of international law because, we have like State of Israel tearing the charter in front of the UN member states and telling them, be ashamed of yourself. Trump calling UN useless, and then Russia, of course, doing its own thing. And we are witnessing 3 genocides in 2025. So by no means do I have confidence in international law. In fact, I think it's illegitimate. The international law, the source of law is not the same as we know it in our national domestic, where the interlocutors are the people of the law. In case of international, it's sovereign states, absolute sovereign states, no people participation. So it couldn't, it has a legitimacy deficiency. So, but on the other hand, if you want to go to ICJ, if you want to get public's attention, if you want to have a framework to work with, instead of, a radical proposal, and some of our colleagues do, that they say, forget the UN, just have a constitutional convention. I think those roads are much, much more difficult to achieve. Maybe after a World War III or the nuclear war, that might be possible. Another San Francisco because of a war or a huge disaster. But if you want to do it in a peaceful manner, in some legal framework, then we got to do it through UN and through a constitutional review of the UN. I think that's the message I want to convey.
Hey, John.
Thank you. I'm confident that no one in the world knows how global governance is going to evolve over the next year, 5 years, 10 years. And I don't think anyone knows if it's going to get worse or get better, so the same. And that makes advocacy very worthwhile. So I put a couple of links into the chat in response to Lee's question about what people can actually do about Dr. Charest's proposal that we activate Article 109. And Dr. Charest will be very familiar, certainly with the first one, which is the Article 109 Coalition, which started up last year. It had its formal launch at Unger Week in September, I think, last year, run by a woman called Heber Ali. It's consulted, I think, with Dr. Charest. That's a top-down approach with Heber looking to form a group of friends at the UN in favor of calling a Article 109 convention. So Justin Hayner, I believe, is on the board of CGS as a member of that coalition. So certainly CGS members could get involved, and book club members here could get involved with that work through the Article 109 coalition through Justin Hayner. And then to complement that, there was talk about the need for a mass movement, people. This website I'm showing here isn't yet fully public. It's work in progress. There's a guy called Roger Abbas in Canada. Some of you may know him, may know his work. But have a look at that Occupy Earth website, which is it's brand new, not yet fully released, looking to create a mass movement for Democratic World Federation. So again, reach out to Roger. He's looking for volunteers to help out. So I guess my 2 points are advocacy is very worthwhile, and there's a lot that you can do to contribute.
So you'll put those things in the chat?
They should be, I mean, I put them in the chat in response to Lee. Can people see them?
Oh, I don't see. Do other people see them? I don't see them.
I mean, I'll put them in again, not as a response to anyone, just the 2 links.
Okay, good. Are there other questions? I just have a comment.
Winston had a question.
Oh, sorry, who?
Winston.
Winston, I'm sorry. Winston.
Yes. Am I being heard?
Yes.
Yes. I think there is too much deference to
Good morning, Eddie.
the P5. And if we were to move away from the individual states to the status conferred on them, I think it might help us in our debate. What we have is a monarchical system within a movement toward greater democracy. And whether it is India or Brazil or any other country who is made permanent, they are likely to behave in the same fashion because we have conferred certain privileges on them, which happens to be inherently unequal. It's from another era, the era of European aristocratic diplomacy that has been brought into this institution. The second point I'd like to make is that each of us has a moral obligation. Those who dissented in San Francisco made the 109 Section 3 a precondition for their supporting the Charter. They say, we will support the Charter if you will promise that we'll have a review. We know it cannot work as is, but we will support it. Even those who had been coerced into doing so. That ought to be part of the message we use in a popular worldwide effort, not dependent on the consent of the permanent five, to have that review, to honor the promise of San Francisco.
All I can say is right on.
Well, we're at about a quarter after 12. Are there any? Oh, one more question. Joseph, do you have another question? Say one more question. I think you're on mute.
I'd like to follow Winston, but Gail, I thought we were going to go to 1:30.
We're waiting. We have about 15 minutes for any announcements and also to discuss selecting our next book. But you can go ahead.
Well, Winston and ladies and gentlemen, we do have a moral responsibility to call out the weaknesses of our common organization for our international relations, most certainly. And I claim to be a advocate of popular pressure, public opinion, and a public movement, a great public movement to do what's been envisaged since the United Nations was founded, that we should have a third generation international organization, and it should take the forms of global government, just as Charest recommends. But the question is about where is the popular movement? There is something called the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy, and this is a relic of the failures to enact a government after World War II. But it is very, very weak. It isn't drawing anybody but a few independently minded people and a few idealists. But I'd like to read you a little something I put together once about the readiness of the people to move toward what Charest advocates. I put this together because I'm so discouraged. I said there must be some greater number of the people in the global public who are ready. So I wrote this. How many people today could we say are ready for world federation? Not indeed all 7 billion in the human population, but I would say millions, if not billions. They are the ones who already work in international businesses, who travel abroad eagerly, who serve in civil society organizations bringing aid to the poor and unfortunate, who are linked in the universal cause of science, who are engaged in scholarship and education that crosses borders, who care about the international news, who show extraordinary sympathy for the victims of continuing wars, who bring in refugees and the downtrodden, who as soldiers have been disillusioned with national uses of force. These millions cherish the promise of human rights in all lands. They are ready to perform their duties as well as to enjoy their liberties under governments guaranteeing universal human rights?
I wonder if I could say something, Joseph, because you know, I would live by every sentiment you just expressed. But remember, I'll make a quote by Mazzini, who was so instrumental in the unification of Italy. His position is that now we have Italy, let us make Italians out of them. When the US came into being, don't forget that there is a massive anti-federalist group. They were the ones, the anti-federalists, for example, who brought us the first 10th Amendment to the Constitution because they had such concerns about it. Remember also that many of the loyalists who fled to Canada had left remnants of themselves within the US. We were not united as a people. We became increasingly so. And I hope that what will happen is that, consistent with 1093, that the new institutions created will allow such an upsurge from below. A human rights court, for example, that Chura is recommending and I have supported in writing, etc., would be an immense outlet for people to express their sentiments rather than the International Court of Justice, which recognizes states as the only subjects in international law.
Well, can I make a comment also? First of all, I share Joseph's sentiments, and Winston, I think you're right to the point that we discussed it a bit a couple of sessions ago, that we first need to feel like world citizens, that we have rights and we are across the boundaries, we are citizens of this planet. Now, those comes through cultural or things, the things we talk about is too abstract for ordinary, common people. It's too far away, too abstract. In order to bring it down to earth, we have to take it project by project, issue by issue. For example, climate change. I don't know if Vernita Perford, if she's listening, like, for example, she has a program for creating music or a song in the next COP negotiations where everybody across the borders can share and sing and feel this unity. Like we first made Italy, then Italians, but we have to make first Italians, then make Italy in terms of, the world citizenship feeling. And this is what Europe did with their song contests and, cultural activities, which was across borders. Vernita, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Shari.
Yeah, I appreciate if you briefly mention your thoughts on that.
Okay, hello everyone. So good to see you. Yes, I had designed a project called the Music and Human Rights Project, and I largely focused on Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which basically states that every human being has the right to an international political and economic order that ensures that all of the other rights in the Universal Declaration are honored. And basically for me, that says we need a global governance system that works for everybody, of, by, and for the people. The research that I did basically examined the relationship between music and moral sensibility. I used human rights as a proxy. And basically from there, I designed the concert where it's not that folks are singing at you, folks are making the music together. There are many examples of this all over the world, but to scale it up, and had worked with musicians with whom I've trained, with who I used to work in terms of even putting short the very short lyrics together from songs around the world that address this issue of let's make this, it wouldn't be a sing-songy kind of thing like, we are the world, that's really nice, but no, we're talking about transformation. We're talking about tools. We're talking about letting folks know that there's a pathway and there is a way to go forward. So, and we got support from the European Union, and we were about to make it happen, and then COVID happened, and so we'll see. Conversations are going, but yeah, thank you for everyone for being here and for this conversation.
Okay, John put a message in the chat. Look out for a press release from Democracy Without Borders on 20th January on a recent survey of global support for a world government. And John, you've had your hand up for a bit. One last count. We only have 5 minutes. So we have to stop after this. So if you can make it short, please.
I'll be brief. I'm responding to Joseph. I'm sure everybody on this call would like to see a mass movement for Democratic World Federation. Joseph is not the first to note in coming to the World Federalist movement. There isn't much of a movement. And in the last 6 months, a bunch of people who share that concern have come together. And so there's a new WFM transnational working group precisely on how to form a mass movement. One of the advisors to that is Bob Flax, who's the ex-executive director of Citizens for Global Solutions. So agreed. We want one. We don't have one. We'd like to have one. One of the members of that working group is Roger Abbas, who I mentioned earlier, the Canadian guy with his Occupy Earth website. I would urge people to look at that. If you got thoughts on it, let Roger know. And yeah, as was pointed out, Democracy Without Borders are going to be doing a press release on 20th of Jan on a recent survey of global support for World Parliament. You know, the worse the world gets, the more it's obvious the way things are structured isn't working too well. So it takes a crisis to catalyze a change. We got quite a crisis brewing.
Okay, James. The next book.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, first of all, Sharia, Gail, everyone who made comments. I think this has been a really brilliant series, super engaging. So I'm going to ask you, first of all to do me a favor. I've just put a link in the chat to our survey. I put this in after every book club session. Very few people respond, but I think this was really engaging. That's my impression. But for your knowledge, I have to write a report to the board twice a year, and it really benefits me to be able to have something to base our reporting on. So your commentary, at least in this final conclusion, would be really valuable. So as many of you as possible, if you could just take 2 minutes to click on the link while we're debating the next book, to give your thoughts, particularly the 25-word review, just so that we are able to continue to push for book club to be fully supported by CGS. So the next item up is, and can everybody access that? If you have a problem, please let me know. Wonderful. Okay, so the next item up is to select a book. I asked you to make proposals in the email I sent out this week. And the 2 proposals we have are for a Just World Order, which was proposed by Marjolin, I believe. And the second proposal is a Second United Nations Charter by the Global Governance Forum. I've put links to them in the chat. Again, please, if you can't access them, let me know. I would maybe ask if it's possible, if Marjolin is still on the call, she is, and can hear me, maybe just to give 2 minutes introduction to the book so that we know what it's about, so we can discuss. And then I will maybe come to John, because he was one of the proposers of a second UN Charter.
Can you hear me?
We hear you perfectly.
Okay, can I go after John? Then I get this book out of my bookshelf and
Of
I can
course.
better introduce it to you.
No problem. So John, would you just give us a 2-minute pitch for the second UN Charter?
Sure. And this is a suggestion really rather than a pitch. It's not something I'm sort of emotionally committed to, but it's an option for this group to think about. So this second UN Charter is very complementary to the Article 109 topic that's just been discussed by this book club, because the Article 109 coalition is advocating this, trying to form a group of friends, is deliberately agnostic on what the reforms to the Charter might be. They're not trying to have an argument in advance of the review conference as to what the output of the conference would be. They just say, we need a review conference, things aren't working as they are. They have a few values in there. Since I think you need a 2/3 majority to get anything through a review conference, it's unlikely to produce something much worse than we have now. So what the second UN Charter is it's a group led by Augusto Lopez Claros. It included former heads of state, former legal advisor to the UN, former foreign ministers, former diplomats, and then activists like Andreas Bummel, and academics like Andy Strauss, and a whole bunch of people, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, blah, 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 who looked at the UN Charter, went through it article by article, proposing a rewording article by article, so it's in great detail, with a justification of every change that's suggested, and has a fantastic introduction put in by Joshua Lincoln of the Baha'i community. So as a complement to the proposal that an Article 109 convention is needed, this is a draft second UN Charter with very detailed specific proposals, and it's pitched as being what could realistically be discussed today. It's not full democratic world federation. It's not simply tinkering with the Security Council. It's as ambitious as that group of people thought it could be for a realistic discussion at a 109 conference today.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. And then, Magdalene, if you are...
Yes, well, I haven't prepared this, and I read the book 2 years ago, but I remember I was very much impressed by the book. And by the way, Alfred Desaya looks at the organization of our planet. Alfred Desaya is a professor in international law. And in this book, Praise for Building a Just World Order, he gives a blueprint, especially based on the upholding of human rights and democracy on our planet. He gives 25 principles of international order, and Maria Fernanda Espinosa, she calls the 25 SAIAS principles of international order a modern Magna Carta. If implemented by the international community, they could help ensure peace with social justice in the 21st century. Pursuant to the United Nations Charter, member states bear responsibility for future generations. Hence, they should take concrete measures to achieve this order based on international law and international solidarity. Well, I think Alfred Desayas is a very inspiring professor in international law who has an inclusive view on all the activities on our planet. So it's he is, in my view, exceptional, because I think many professors nowadays they concentrate mainly on the Western perspective. And I think Alfred Desayas, he gives an inclusive perspective. And that's what appeals a lot to me, because there are more cultures and different perspectives on our planet, and not only the Western-oriented one. So this is why I could recommend that we are going to read this book in the book club. It will be revealing.
Thank you. So first of all, I would just ask if anybody has any other suggestions that they'd like to propose for consideration. And of course, if we don't pick to do it next, we could do it in a future round of book club later in the year. It also goes that at any time moving forwards, if you have an idea, feel super welcome to reach out to me. Joseph.
Joseph, you're on mute.
I've read so many of these books, and I have a complete list, but I don't have one in mind that I think would be any better than Alfred de Zayas. However, I think that these books are not reaching the people and are not really moving the movement. It takes effort and time to read a good book, and you have to think deeply about it, and most people are not willing to do that. We are, and look at our numbers. I just counted them. I think there's less than 20.
I counted 20 altogether.
20, well, good for you. However, there are 7 billion people in the world, and what I think would be helpful is if we read a book about the history of movements like ours. For instance, the movement for the 8-hour day, in effect, men's rights, or then the movement for women's rights, which followed, or maybe the movement for Black civil rights, the movements for and the like, even the communist movement, a history of the the social democratic movement. We are, most of us, social democrats, and we might study what they tried to do, particularly after the 19th century, after Karl Marx. And of course, that movement went very wrong, but we should know it was a popular movement, and people by the millions were motivated by the Russian Revolution. In some ways, it was a precursor to what we're trying to do. It empowered people, and people need that right now. The ordinary people need empowerment, and I don't really have a good book in mind, but I'm thinking that a history of some of these movements that shook the world would really be timely for us.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Gail, I'll also have a closing remark if when it's the right time.
A closing remark about your book or a closing remark about other books?
No, just,
General. Okay, I will give you the last word, Shaya, before we close.
Okay, good.
There's also a message from Bob Flex in the chat that I want to direct your attention to.
Bob Flex.
Sorry, that's not a message from Bob Flax. The list is from Bob Flax. The message is from me. So Bob Flax is advising the WFM Transnational Working Group on Building a Global Movement. As you guys will all know, he's an academic in the field of world federalism. And he has proposed a whole bunch of links and books to do with building a mass movement in response to Joseph's comment. So without Bob's permission, so you better ask him, I'm copy pasting this list that he submitted to the Transnational Working Group. There'll be a whole bunch of books and links here that could respond to what Joseph's suggesting.
Unfortunately, I don't think if you're referring to overview of select social movement building models, the link hasn't translated into the chat, so you'd have to drop in. You've done it below. I apologize.
Yeah, that was the heading. There's a whole lot of links going in now.
Cool. Okay, great.
One more to come.
So with that said, I would like to just ask, I think we can probably get Augusto for a couple of sessions. We've had him before. He's generous with his time, and we have contacts with him. My wonder is, Marjolin or anyone else, if they have contact that I can use to reach out to Alfred. John, you've got your finger up.
Yeah, just to say, because there's a whole team of people around Augusto helped draft that second charter. You wouldn't need to rely just on Augusto. You could maybe do an introductory session, but you could also get Andreas Bommel, Andy Strauss.
That would be great.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people.
What I'm wondering is, so first of all, Marjolin, do you perhaps know Alfred I've lost his name.
Yes, I know him.
Okay, so
we are in
you would
contact.
perhaps be able to provide an introduction?
Absolutely. So you are James, because I don't
Yes.
see your name
Yes,
on.
I apologize. I'm James.
No problem.
I will write to you after this session.
All right, that's okay.
Okay, so my proposal would be that with Joseph, I will write to you as a follow-up, and we will brainstorm, and I will circulate then an email to everybody about possible books on related movements that we could come to next or in a future set of sessions. I would propose that because I'm reasonably sure we can get to the Global Governance Forum reasonably soon, that we do that, and it fits well with this with Shaya's thesis, that we would perhaps go for that next. And I propose that solely, if I'm honest, because I feel I can manage that by this time next month, to set something up, and that we would be able to keep rolling. Otherwise, we could have a reflective session for discussion, but I think we've had a pretty good discussion. So it might be time to go to the next thing. And then in the meantime, I would coordinate with Marjolaine to reach out to Alfred to set up a future set of sessions, possibly starting we're now in January, so that'd be something like February, March, maybe April, to give a couple of sessions for the second UN Charter. Would that be reasonable and acceptable for everybody? I see heads nodding, but yeah, okay, thumbs up. Okay, wonderful. So that's the plan. With that said, I want to say thank you to everybody. And if it's okay, Gail, I will hand over to Shaya to close us out.
Yes, that's fine.
Shaya.
Okay, well, first of all, regarding Center for UN Constitutional Research, I just want to make the comment that we don't endorse any specific UN reform solutions. The reason is that, as like Joseph and some other people have mentioned, we talk amongst ourselves. It's the same people, more or less, and also it's not wildly. We don't have an open call from like Russia, China, India. The countries that would probably be the key stakeholders in any future UN. And this is a good job. It's a good thing to do, but we look at it as academic. Our emphasis is project-based, youth-based, and that's what, like Vernita is aware, and like Kurosh, I see he's not speaking, is part of the Youth Climate Ambassador Group. So we take projects like the COP negotiations and the youth. In fact, if this wasn't Saturday Night Europe, we probably would have had more youth listening to what we have to say. So this is our emphasis. We don't endorse any specific solutions. And we think that people's movement, grassroots movements, and especially youth, this is going to be a long process. UN transformation and constitutionalization is going to be a long, long process. So we need youth in our team. That said, those who got the book, please do make a review. I appreciate it. Part of whatever we sell goes to Center for UN Constitutional Research. And I want to thank the CGS folks, Gail, Donna, and James. This has been a wonderful experience for me. And also it has created a whole bunch of side conversations, which I didn't expect. And new, alliances, both intellectually and maybe in terms of activism. So what you are doing is great. I appreciate CGS's James, Gail, again, the team for arranging this. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a very fascinating series of sessions and very central to the mission of our organization.
Shaya, may I ask you to stay on for 5 minutes just after the session if you have a moment, just for a quick consultation?
Who are you asking? Sorry?
You.
Oh, okay, sure. I'll stay.
So with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
I will send out an email about our next book as soon as I have information.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Stay well, everyone.
Wow.
Keep healthy and peace through justice.
For
These
very
yes,
fascinating
yes, yes.
conversations.
Okay, maybe these other two folks are logged on but not there. So maybe, I don't know if you can drop them or.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. Oh, no, I do not want to do that. Just 1 second. Do not report to Zoom. Okay, it was just so. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, brilliant, brilliant. This is what it's all about. I know it's a small group, but they're all really serious and they're long time supporters, campaigners. They're critical to our organization as board members, as donors, as champions. This has been, I think, one of the best received books we've done in really a couple of years. I think the last one that we had that really garnered this level of interest was it was about One World by I can't remember his name now, but about Indian independence, and it was a very very emotive book. This is more, I mean, it's right up our street in terms of subject matter. As Joseph has said, Joseph tends to be a bit dour. I think he's kind of run out of steam, but I don't think he's wrong that at this time we need to look for inspiration, probably from elsewhere, about how we make this vision of yours come true. We need a work plan, and we need to figure out how to get people involved. And to that end, I wanted to ask you a question favor for the future. So we're at right now. Setting up a national youth network in the United States of young people who are interested in these topics. It is extremely small. I'm setting this up, and I'm doing it entirely based at the moment on quality, not quantity. My plan has been to find a small group of young people who are not, how do I put this, not already dyed-in-the-wool federalists. I want people who are interested in the subject and ready to get involved. There is already an informal network of young world federalists in the US, and they get together. They have not proven to be easy to engage with CGS. They're kind of doing their own thing, and they're very much focused on the big picture stuff of championing um, a world federal government for its own sake. Whereas a lot of other young people, I think, are interested in a lot of the issues that we champion and think that the UN needs to be reformed and that human rights, there should be an individual court to protect the individual, all the things that we, as pillars of this bigger picture, they are very supportive of these things. I mean, there's just a lot of young people. They're very cynical, but they're also chomping at the bit for something to do. So we've picked, I think, really just as a reflection of our a realistic review of our capacity. So after Rebecca left, the reality was she was the front face of a lot of our advocacy. So we had to make a decision on which topics we were going to push behind, and particularly to try to provide some guidance to young people. I mean, CGS is involved in dozens of initiatives in principle, on paper. The reality is that we're not the horsepower behind them. But we wanted to pick a group of campaigns, so we picked 5 of them, and that's the 109 campaign. So this is why you're so important. It's mega. That's actually 23 or something initiative. So that's a very broad, but it's environment, and kids are into environment. We've picked Layla Sadat's initiative for a Crimes Against Humanity treaty because of what's happened in Israel, Gaza. There's just a lot of interest in. People say the UN doesn't work or international law doesn't work. And we say, yeah, we agree. We need a treaty that specifically addresses the gap between individual criminal accountability and genocide. And at the moment, there isn't a treaty that allows nation states to intervene in the International Court or the ICJ that isn't the Genocide Convention. That's the only one where, for example, in this case, Israel had to answer. There isn't another means for them to effectively do that without referral from the Security Council, and that's a roadblock, right? So, when young people get frustrated, we can say, well, there is a solution to this. Somebody's got a suggestion on the table that start trying to fill gaps in there. And that's what we're going for. We've picked campaigns. There's also interest in nuclear disarmament, which I was really surprised by, but I'm really glad because this is a backbone of CGS historically in the nuclear non-proliferation area. And we're trying to figure out something on migration, because in the US, migration is a big deal. In the EU, it's a big deal, and it's going to get a bigger deal. I mean, I work also as a project manager on a climate change project, in planetary health, and there's going to be more climate-driven migration in the future. That's happening. So these things are our 5 pillars, and we're trying. What our plan is to create basically opportunities to connect young people, students on campuses in US universities with those campaigns, so that we give them a free hand. We have these things called World Citizens Clubs. We have a very small number at the moment. The idea is they have a certain amount of freedom, and we'll give them a certain amount of very small amount of money to do whatever they think is world citizenship. But we also will ask them to do what we call a capstone, which is to on campus champion one of these 5 campaigns, 5 themes. So our idea is to be the hourglass that connects these campaigns to the students. And things like the 109 campaign, things like Mega, they talk about wanting public participation and mass movement engagement, but they don't really have any tools for us yet. So if I say to 109, okay, I've got students for you, there's nothing they can do with it. So right now, Justin Hanna is involved in developing that. So the idea is that we can be maybe a test ground for them all to figure out how they can get people, young people, to be involved in their campaigns and to stay on message. This is what's really important for me. We learned the hard way that when you say do what you like, they do what they like. And they go way off piste. And so at some point, it is entirely possible that we will need briefing, information, guidance for these young people when we find a group. What our plan is to set up 5 working groups on these 5 themes, link them to the campaigns, and then get a core group of young people to write advocacy briefs on those themes that are regularly updated for CGS members. So the idea is to create basically an engine so that these young people are in the engine room, they're writing the briefs, they're getting information from people like you, people like Justin, but being guided by those campaigns. So somebody like Justin says, right, our priority this next 6 months is to get US Congress people or cities or whoever to pay attention to this fact. And then we'll try to drive to support the young people to share information with our members, because a lot of them, like Joseph Beretta is a really good example. These people have been doing this all their lives. And if I try to convince him to go and do something now, like lobby his congressperson, as Lee said, which congressperson, which senator would support this? They don't know. Well, we can target them on individual issues, and what they've learned in the past, and I guess we've all have a similar experience. You can build relationships with all kinds of people. You can make it their champion issue. If you feed them the right information, they're empowered by knowing something. So a senator that knows a lot about this can up their profile by becoming an expert on it and having an opinion and becoming the person the media goes to and so forth. So what we're going to try and do is get young people to be the engine room for the old people to go and do the lobbying, because it's the old people, if I'm frank, that have the spare time, they make the donations and they vote. So, senators or officers will meet with them. And this is kind of the plan. And so that's a long way of saying, would you perhaps be open to, at some point in the future, and it might be in 6 months, and it might be a year, or it might be in a couple of weeks, to just be available to be a reference point that I could get a group of young people to sit with you, to be a guide or a mentor or something like that, a limited amount of time. Absolutely not a lot, but on the 109 issue.
Yeah, we have some experience in that. I have big belief in that we got to get youth involved. So even the organization only is about 6, 7 years old. CUNCR, its very first project, the most successful Series 3 projects we had before COVID was Climate Justice and Democracy series with the youth. And this was, in Brussels, this was in Greece. And, we did mountain climbing, we had hackathons, very, very engaging for the youth. They need to be, it has to be issues that they like and they can touch. So we talk about UN reform, it's kind of, on the side for them. If they know UN reform would solve climate change, then they would be interested. But if you're talking about Security Council reform, it's just too abstract for them,
So I have an opinion on that, which is something we've road tested with our young people, which is to be a little bit brutal with them, which is you can do what you like, you can focus on issues you want, but you need to know that if you want change in your lifetime, you also have to do some of the boring stuff, which is engaging in governance, engaging in law, all these things. And you don't have to be a lawyer or a governance specialist, but you do have to recognize that the legal instruments at your disposal, the policy of the government, the political decisions, they will shape your lives. And so you're also, while you can, we've got kids who are like going to streams and cleaning the streams and then writing a letter to the governor saying, why as a young person do I have to clean the stream? Why aren't you doing it? That's a Parks and Recreations, engagement. It's not a global governance engagement, but we've also got them doing movie nights and then writing to the Supreme Court and saying, like, we all watched movies on the cases like documentary films on the cases you're reviewing. We think you should do X, Y, and Z. Like we're trying to introduce the process of them recognizing that the brutal matter of fact is that until they start to take the governance seriously, they're playing, they're not engaging. So if they're really serious, and that doesn't mean we're trying not to like make them only do this because it is quite dull and it isn't as satisfactory and they do need those other things. But we're also not covering in sugar anymore. We started like that 2 years ago of being like nicey nicey, and it just doesn't get you anywhere because at some point you've got to say to them, the action is here. The real action is here. You've got to start to think about it. And the reason we picked these 5 themes is they were areas where we know people who are right at the top of the game that we can link them to. So when they say we're interested, we've got something to answer with. If they said they were interested in any number of other topics, we could say that's really important, but you're going to have to go and talk to somebody else. So this is part of our strategy to.
Right. Well, I think you guys are in the right path based on the past 67 years experience. Unfortunately, we cannot rely on just the concept of World Federation, which is the ultimate that what we want and what really fixes the world. But it has to be broken into pieces, and the pieces we got to get the youth involved. Now we have experience with climate change. We have some experience with space governance, and AI governance is in my top agenda. So these 3 areas, we do have some youth with some experience already. What I recommend is instead of just getting me involved, I bring 3, 4 of these youth activists that we have, either the YCAs, Youth Climate Ambassadors, or other ones, and I'll introduce them to your youth team and they can collaborate. And our specialty is not that much US, but it's Europe, Asia, and Africa. So we'll have a database of like.
So this is a total digression, but one of the I think that for the first time, so obviously in my lifetime, I would imagine in yours, there is a serious case for particularly European young people to start to think about young people in US as beneficiaries. So the US is becoming an extraordinary contested space. I was in the US in May for our annual meeting, and there's an older lady, German lady, who sits on the CGS board who I walked with her late one night to the metro station in Washington so she could get the train home. And we were talking, she was very concerned. She said, James, they think it's 1:45 and they haven't realized it's midnight. And this was kind of a metaphor for the other metaphor that I met lots and lots. I live in Serbia. I was staying with a Serbian family. I met their friends. They were all like, we're going to be fine. Like they'd all lost their jobs because of USAID and all that stuff, but they were like, we'll be fine because these people are not used to working in contested political spaces. And they're all like, we're going to get jobs as consultants working for, education unions, police unions, like all these, anybody who formerly thought that they had power as a consequence of coordination, so unionization and or using the law, is about to find that those things don't work as well in a contested political space. And all these people have been drawn into Washington because the American government picked up people in Jordan, in Morocco, in Senegal, in Serbia, in Ukraine, and they sucked the best of them and brought them back to DC. And all those people talked to me and they were like, this place, it's already happening. Like the community here of practitioners is for whatever reason not recognizing that they're not like seeing the tidal wave coming, that they're on the crest. This stuff is, and as we see right now in these days around us, there is an explosion of behavior which is just they're not equipped for. They're in shock. And I think that there will be a benefit to connect young people in Europe and young people in America for the first time to build solidarity in the way that we used to connect young people from Germany and Bosnia. I mean, that's still happening. I'm involved in doing that. But like, that's also going to be worthwhile doing it between Europe and the US. And I I don't know that Europe is in a much, much, much better place, but it's still in a better place than the US is right now.
Yeah. I don't know how familiar you are with Jeff, the Young European Federalists. They have 20,000 members.
Yeah.
Their president has become one of our youth climate ambassadors.
Right.
This is before he was elected as the president. So we have also great opportunity to get them involved, which is a 20,000 force, but they have to have a common goal. For example, climate change or some other topic which interests them.
I think that if I might comment on that I have a slight concern about I think it's softening now, but last year, 2025, for me, 2024, 25 was the year when the EU became a bit nationalistic, at a supranational level. So it was super evident that they were complaining about the transactional nature of the US, but they were becoming increasingly transactional themselves. Their approach to Ukraine until recently has been very transactional. You fight and die, we give you guns, we're happy. It's the same on its periphery. And it's doing it in Europe. It's not doing it in Africa and South America. It's doing it in Europe. It's doing it in Serbia.
Do you think that's true of the youth also, or just the politicians at the
Well, that's the thing, is that my experience of it was the cynicism of like the EU is not baked in, but they're doing good deals for the EU. That's their job. It's the job of national governments to negotiate with them and represent their people. Although there's a power dynamic, part of that power dynamic is saying if you join the EU, you get the benefits of it. So there's a rationale to it. But I saw it in young people, and I saw it in young people from Jeff being kind of like, you're on the inside of Europe and we're competing with America, we're competing with other stakeholders, and we now need to outcompete them. And I'm like, okay, that's fine in terms of a European political bloc, but as federalists, you have to surely recognize your goal is to grow with them and not against them. And at some point, you're going to have to find common cause with other young people in the US and young people in Europe outside of the EU. So that's, and I know Russia, it's a very hard case to imagine, but there's almost as many people in Europe outside the EU as inside the EU, in East and Southeast Europe, Turkey and that are in the accession sphere. And they got a little bit closed-minded to that. I think they've got very focused on being grown-ups and adults in the conversation. So the young people were talking about how does the EU respond to America? How is it going to compete? How does it respond to China? And not thinking how does it collaborate with, how do we as federalists within the EU, who have become the backbone of the EU, how do we collaborate with young people and not young people in those spaces to work together? And so there was this kind of this thing that was inherent to federalism earlier of being part of a peace movement, of a post-World War, there was a consciousness in that. They seem to have lost that in a way that everybody has lost it. And while everybody else losing it, to me, is kind of like, that's why we're in a problem for young federalists in Europe to not be driven by that mission of international solidarity and peace building is nuts. And we have to, but I don't want to pick a fight with them, but maybe we can start to resolve that a little bit with young people from other places.
Be mindful that there is a minority in Jeff as well as EUF that are actually world federalists. There's a minority, but so right now this new president is one of those minorities that really thinks beyond.
What's his name?
His first name is Moritz, but I forgot his last name. But I can introduce you. I kind of know him indirectly through what one of our youth climate ambassadors who became friends with him in Ventotene, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So this is also how we sent a student to Ventotene this year called Isabella, who I have very high hopes for. She's just what we were looking for. And she met, I guess it's Morris, because he'd just been elected president. Because when I said you should probably reach out to Jeff, she said, "Oh, that's okay. I've got the president's telephone number." I was like, okay, you did your homework. So in fact, what I would do is I would ask Isabella. I'm trying to push everything through the kids, so I'd ask her to do the outreach rather than us. But maybe it's something we can join up around the back and think about how we can connect Jeff and just other young people in Europe interested in these issues with young people in America to start to build some transatlantic solidarity. Because, I mean, how can I say this? I also, so just as a complete aside, but a metaphor, I worked a lot in dealing with the past in Yugoslavia, so the consequence of war crimes and conflict. And I've also worked in this region in Holocaust research and commemoration. And in the last year, we've been negotiating with there's a Holocaust memorial in Belgrade, and I've worked with them before, creating exhibitions and to do something. And my wife said, "Oh, you want to be really careful." And we were at dinner, and their friend said, "You know, Israel, it's like no, you know, you're going to get really." If I can be blunt, chattel if you do this. And I was like, there's never a bad time to teach about the Holocaust. And the best time to teach about the Holocaust is when people are telling you not to. Like that's for sure for me. I think the same with this transatlantic, rupture. The best time, it's always a good time to try to bring people together, and the best time to do it is when the heads of state don't know what are not doing it. So I don't know if this is something we can do right now because we have very weak infrastructure at the moment in terms of like participation. But my goal is that by March, we start to connect our students, which are a small group, with our chapters, and then we both drive each other. We've got interest among the chapters to do more engaged work, more lobby, well, not lobbying, but advocacy, more meetings with their representatives, and that will give a cause for more young people to get involved, to be part of the production of that advocacy material. And it's great for their CVs. It gives them a reason to do something. So I don't know if this is going to be 3 months that we can be ready to then start to reach out to others, or if it's going to be 9 months or a year. But I really just didn't want to miss this opportunity to say to you, can we stay in touch and see what we can do?
Sure. I have your, of course, email, but if I'll have your phone number, I think I got it at one time.
Yeah, I can. Do you want me
we have
to
a
put it in the
WhatsApp
chat
group.
now?
Yeah. So through WhatsApp, we can be more in communication, and we have like subgroups, youth subgroups active, for example, for the next conference, the COP conference that this year is going to be in 2026 is going to be in Turkey, COP
Yeah.
31.
Yeah, which is great.
Right. And yeah, it's close to Europe, it's close to you guys. And it's not that expensive to go there. These are the issues that we were facing in Brazil. But,
Yeah.
and, of course, we are authorized, accredited by the UN, and we can get some passes. By the way, I highly recommend CGS to do the same thing. It's not a
Yeah.
difficult process, but takes about a year so that you become accredited by UNFCCC as an NGO that can send delegates, observers. We don't vote, but we are observers. We can go to the sessions. So I welcome your initiative. I think it's really good for CGS. And we help as much as we can. But personally, my emphasis is going to be in getting to the people. Now, this book, is theoretical, it's legal, it's as a reference, it's good for universities, policymakers. But next book I'm working on is for the people. So
Great.
I'm going to.
This is what Joseph is saying. We need a book for people to read and
Yeah, right.
turn
So I'm going
minds.
to spend time on that, but I'll be available and I'll try to connect some of our YCA leaders. And we have about 80 YCAs, but the 3, 4 of them are really active at a time. They go through phases. They get married. They get, they need a job. They have kids. So they phase in and out. So we have right now, I would say, about 5 or 6 active ambassadors.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely join them and let them. I personally sit back and try to support them. Let them initiate the things they want to do. So we will be available.
I mean,
Sure.
so it's entirely possible that I will also go to COP, but not with CGS, but so I'm part-time with CGS, and part-time I work for a European Union funded planetary health research project. My friend is a physicist. She does lots of models. I basically only work on that because she needed a project manager. But what I ended up doing is not working on the project at all. So I'm not really involved in the technical end, but instead there's a cluster of 5 projects working on various different aspects of planetary health. So they're creating early warning systems for disease vectors. They're doing impacts of things like air pollution, water pollution on public health and how to mitigate that. They're doing stuff on human psychology.
Great. So you think you can get accreditation discussion on your own?
One or the other, but they are a really
If you
interesting
could, then
group.
let us know. You'll be a good candidate. And also what we do some, like for example, we don't really pay for their travel expenses, but we get like an Airbnb or
Yeah.
two Airbnbs, shared housing. We usually have a dinner out or lunch out. So those you would be welcome to join us
Yeah.
in
Well, it
those.
might be a really interesting opportunity to. I've been pushing within CGS, but mostly John and I can't remember Augusto's collaborator, Maya Groff. It went a bit cold, but pushing them to pay attention to planetary health because for whatever reason, within the climate space governance and the global governance area, it's
Maya
already dealt
Gross,
with.
is she around? I haven't heard from her for the past like a year.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I emailed with her and then she went cold because we were supposed to have a call and she just then didn't respond for like a week and then it didn't happen. Because but the reason and now it seems that something will happen with Georgetown University and something else. But anyway, the EU is putting tons of money into this because how basically climate will change how healthcare is provided. And healthcare is a massive proportion of our GDP. We already spend it. We will now spend it differently in the future. The EU is planning for that and doing the research in order. And it's really things like, vaccinations need to happen in March and not in April because the weather is warmer or wetter or whatever. But knowing so you don't screw it up. There's a lot of this very basic kind of public health stuff going on that's linked to climate change and lots of down the road impacts. And this is a massive body of funding that we should be leaning on because, a really good reason to get politicians to do something about it is to tell them that their constituents are going to get sick and a lot of them are going to die. Actually, worst case scenario, they don't die, they get very sick and they become a massive, we are living a morbidity crisis where people are exposed to illnesses and diseases and debilitating conditions that they weren't before and they don't know how to respond. And the thing is that we have the answers to a lot of the questions that will come up. So people living in North Africa have the answers to problems you will have in Spain. People in Spain have the problems you will have in France. People in France, because they lived with these things for generations. And as climate change evolves, things are going to move around. They're talking about, is it Blue Nile fever becoming endemic in the Levant, which it just wasn't 30 years ago. And we had a meeting with the head epidemiologist in Israel. I mean, as well as all the stuff that they have to deal with in going on because of conflict and the exposure to disease. They're just like, people here will not accept that we need to kill all the mosquitoes with terrible, nasty gases, but we can't do it at a scale, and these small measures won't work. So until there's public pressure that says you can use sort of basically spray chemicals in the air, those countries around there are just going to suffer from these new emerging diseases. And that's just an example of like where you have this interaction between people knowing what to do, politicians not wanting to respond, public engagement, and it's going to be like that on every topic. So anyway, sorry, that's a digression. My point is,
Okay.
let's stay in touch.
Yeah. James, I appreciate your energy. I admire your dynamism and your concerns. And wherever we can, we help. So yeah, let's keep in touch and let's get the youth start the movement.
So I
but it
dropped
has to be focused and on project basis. They are not going to go for federalism. They're going to go
I agree with that.
specific projects that the federalism would help to implement.
I mean, if I can be honest, I will go after this, but I find a useful way to talk to them about it, which is honest from my perspective, is that I'm not a dyed in the wool world federalist as a kind of this thing should exist because of its own concern. I'm not a socialist, I'm not a capitalist. None of these things are inherently the best thing. But if I sit here and explain all the things that I think should happen in the world, at some point I will get to the point that we will need a democratic governance structure to adopt the laws and hold accountable people under those laws for all of the things that I want. So we're going to get there, even in any kind of, and I think most people, and if you explain to them that way, sooner or later you're going to want democratic accountability for all these things you want. They're like, yeah, I would probably like that.
Yeah. Just to maybe have it domestically, we just want it globally, universally.
Absolutely. So I put my number in the chat. If you want to send me a WhatsApp, so I have your number.
Sure.
Then we're good. Okay. Just one more time. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was a great experience, and let's move forward.